My guest has written a memoir about caring for her husband who died with early onset dementia, Alzheimer's. She's here today to talk about that memoir, and I want to tell you now that it received global attention. Her story went viral in the best of ways because it was so helpful. Her story is romantic, it's also real, and it's raw. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Page One, the award-winning show for writers with the reader in mind.
That draws the reader along, just like fiction.
Here's your host and producer, Zita Christian.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me again. My guest today is Lisa Marshall, and she is the author of the memoir, Oh, Hello, Alzheimer's. Lisa, thanks for joining me.
Zita, thank you so much for having me.
I am so grateful to you for agreeing to come on the show and talk about your experience as a caregiver for a spouse with dementia. As you know, and as my audience knows, I took that same journey. And I think that when people like you and like me have been through a journey that is so devastating, and in whatever way it manifests, we have a voice, we have a platform of some kind, and we have the opportunity to share what we've learned. I think we have a responsibility to do that. So I am deeply grateful that you are here today to share the kind of information that you know and I know can help other people out there who are not where we are already on the journey, because we have survived that part. So there are several particular topics I want to talk about today, but I want to start with validating emotions, because I think that's an area where a lot of caregivers, they have trouble recognizing and accepting what the emotions are. And then that becomes a problem for their friends and their family, who don't realize not only the gamut of emotions, but the depth. So could you talk about what some of the big emotions are that you experienced as in caring for your husband, Peter?
Certainly. And it's a great question, because I think dementia sometimes has this taboo that we shouldn't talk about it, but we can't form our support group without talking about it. So I believe the biggest emotion is grief, because as you are caring for your loved one, you are watching them disappear. And I think by sharing your emotions, those deep, raw emotions of grief and disappointment that your life isn't turning out the way that you thought it would, especially with early onset, you're asking people to witness the horror of it all and look at what is happening to me, to us, to our life. And so I would say that the grief is the worst emotion in that gamut.
I've read a lot of memoirs written by people who have been caregiving for a loved one with some form of dementia. And you talked about something that I had not seen in the other memoirs. At the time that Peter was diagnosed, and refresh my memory here, how old was he when he received the diagnosis?
53.
53. Oh my gosh. So he was working full time.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing obvious changes at home, which is why you went through that whole process of finding doctors, and that in itself is worthy of a whole episode of what that process can be like. And it can be an emotional ordeal and extremely frustrating. When you got the diagnosis and you recognize that, okay, my husband has a full-time job, and if I'm seeing these changes here at home and I'm realizing that there are so many things he's forgetting, what's happening with him at work? And you mentioned in the book that you spoke with an elder law attorney,
Mhm.
which I think is really, really important. Speak with somebody who specializes in this field. And after speaking with the elder law attorney, you wrote a letter to Peter's employer explaining the diagnosis. Could you tell me why you took that step and what effect it had on on Peter's job, on your health insurance, and just a general financial picture because you took that step?
Yeah, I was happy that I did it because I was nervous about Peter's capability. And it was the one part of his life that I didn't have, I couldn't peer into what was happening all day long. And when I finally did write the letter, I wrote it to HR, and it was protection. I was concerned that he was going to get fired for not performing, to the level that he was capable of before. And if I was seeing so many changes at home, I knew that there were changes at work too. And so I needed to explain why the changes were happening. And so it was the perfect storm in the best way. I got support from Peter's HR department. Peter got support from the HR department. And they just very carefully started removing responsibilities from him until we made the mutual decision that it was time for him to quote unquote retire. And there were many days that he would simply sit in the lobby looking out over the Hartford landscape and not really do any work at all. They were perfect to us. They were kind and compassionate. And I have worked for companies that are not that way. So I was worried, but they couldn't have handled it better and more beautifully and with such grace just to allow him to exit, and continued to help us financially for a little while until we were on Social Security disability. And so I cannot say enough about his HR department. They were just fantastic.
So in general, would you recommend to other caregivers who's, especially in a spousal situation, other caregivers who have a spouse with dementia, would you recommend that they contact the HR department of the spouse's employer and say, my person has been diagnosed with, whatever the form of dementia is, what can we do?
Yes, 100%, because you're protecting your family, you as a couple from him or her being fired, and then where do you go? So I think it is important. And and this disease, we sometimes tell little white lies to
Yes.
our person. And my feeling is that as long as you're not hurting them in any way and you're just helping to guide them along their journey, I feel like it's okay. And so we had a retirement party for Peter, and he thought that he was retiring. And it was just beautiful because that made him feel good instead of made him feel like he didn't have purpose or he was being fired or let go for some reason. So he still felt whole.
I wonder, and I don't know the answer to this because it's just occurring to me now. I wonder how much attention is being given or information classes to employers to help them deal with employees who suffer from dementia. Because sometimes, as you and I both know, the signs and signals are all there. It could be long before an actual diagnosis.
Yes, and that was our case. I mean, I look back after receiving the diagnosis, and I know that there were signs 5, 6, 7 years before. So Peter would have been in his late 40s. But I work closely with the Alzheimer's Association and wear many hats with them and do a lot of volunteering. And they offer some support classes for employers so that they can recognize these signs too. So, other than the Alzheimer's Association's education programs, which are of course free, I don't know of any other tools that employers have, because often it can be misconstrued as non-compliance or,
Right.
performance issues.
Right. Well, I'm going to make a point to look into that. I mean, I love the Alzheimer's Association. And for those of you who want to jot something down, simply alz.org. You'll find a ton of information there. Lisa, one of the next things I want to ask you about, and oh gosh, this is so controversial, and I remember
Hmm.
agonizing over it myself. And I will say that I facilitate a small dementia support group, and it's one of the things that we all talk about. That's the whole question of respite care.
Hmm.
So I know that while you were caring for Peter, you suffered a mini stroke. And I remember reading that, and I had that little gasp, and then I thought, oh, of course, the I had totally put it out of my mind, but I had a what I thought was some kind of a heart incident, to the point that I called 911, and I spent the day in the hospital, and they did tons of tests because I was convinced I was having a heart attack. And a couple months later, I broke out with a mild, fortunately, mild case of shingles, all stress related. I
Yeah.
think people don't realize, I don't think caregivers realize when they have overextended their resources. And I certainly think all too often family and friends don't realize the burden that the caregiver is under. So I wondered if you could talk with me a little about how you approached finally agreeing to get respite care for yourself, and you made arrangements for Peter to live for 2 weeks in, I call it a memory dwelling. I don't like the word facility. So in a memory dwelling, he was there for 2 weeks. How did you arrange that, and what did you do in those 2 weeks, and did it make a difference?
That's a lot of questions,
I
Zita.
know, I know. Take it anywhere you want to go.
So, respite is my hot button. Caregiver self-care is just so important, and I preach it and preach it and preach it. You have to put your oxygen mask on first, right? And what had happened is I started with some caregivers in the home, a few hours a week. There's 168 hours in a week, and maybe 12 of them I was getting some help with. So it wasn't enough. And then I found a wonderful daycare that Peter went to for 30 hours a week. A little bus would pick him up in the morning, and the bus would drop him off at night. He had a great time while he had a great time, until he wasn't having a good time anymore. And he became agitated, and he became fearful, and all the things that can happen with dementia. And so there I was with 30 hours a week of respite to, go to my doctor's appointments and clean the house and do all the necessary things, and try to let my shoulders come down a little bit and breathe and inhale and exhale. And then he was too agitated, and he was trying to escape from the daycare. He was not safe, and they really weren't equipped to handle that kind of behavior. And so he was discharged immediately with no notice. And so I went from 30 hours of respite to 0 hours of respite, and it hit me like a train. And I just felt very alone, and it was a big weight to carry. And I remember posting about it on my Facebook page, Oh Hello Alzheimer's, and the executive director of that memory dwelling, as you call it, reached out to me. She was a follower, and she reached out and she said, I know that you wouldn't consider a 30-day respite. I know that. But would you consider a 2 week respite? And I immediately took her up on it. And so, did it help? Yes. Were there feelings of guilt? Yes. All of the feelings. But I wanted to spend time alone in the places that I knew I was going to be alone. Our home. We had a little vacation home in Charlestown, Rhode Island. And also I wanted to visit some friends. So there were three places that I wanted to spend time with on my own. So I drove to Pennsylvania. I spent some time with family on my own. I went to our beach house by myself and spent some time on the beach. And I spent a few days in our home getting ready for Peter to come back home after the 2 weeks. It was it was grueling and refreshing. and wonderful and horrible. It was all the things.
I think one of the important things for other caregivers of a family member with dementia, well, maybe just everything in life, whatever decisions we make, whatever actions we take, there's always going to be a price to be paid. The question is the price worth it? And I I could not, I kept Dick at home the whole time, but there is no way in this world I could have done that without the help of my daughter, who would come here for, days, a week, 10 days at a time, and my neighbors. Um, One couple in particular, Mark and Angel, they were on speed dial. I had them here 3 times one night. Um, it's like there's no way to do it alone.
I feel the
It's
same way. I could not have kept Peter home either without my army of support. I mean,
Yeah.
friends came out of the woodwork to help, and neighbors and the community and followers. I really felt incredibly supported, and there's no way that I could have kept him home without friends and family, just like you.
I want you to share with me the power that you found in the words actually and let's.
Sure, two different concepts. So, as I mentioned earlier, my hot button is self-care, even now, and I think for everyone, because you must take care of yourself and you must breathe and you must find peace. Really, truly find peace to enjoy this blink of a life that we get. And so you have to. I developed the 4 A's of self-care. So the 4 A's are accept help when someone offers it. Now, I'm an independent and stubborn woman, always have been. I can do everything myself. I could not do this myself. And so when someone would say, hey, let me know if you need anything, I would say, oh, yeah, of course. Caregivers are never going to say, yes, I need some help. It's hard to admit that you need help, first of all. But the first A in the 4 A's of self-care is accept help when it's offered. If no one is offering, then you need to ask people for help for what you need. The third A is articulate exactly what you need. I need someone to take my loved one for an hour so that I can take a nap, take a shower, take a walk, take a breather, or go to the doctor, or I need a meal for my freezer. Because by the time dinner time rolls around, you're too exhausted to make a meal. So it started out as the 3 A's, and I realized that that wasn't quite enough for me. I needed a little bit more of a push. And so the fourth A is just the word actually. So when someone would say to me, let me know if there's anything I can do to help you, I made myself and trained myself to say the word actually. Now I'm holding myself accountable for actually asking for some help. So actually, next Wednesday, I have a doctor appointment that I could really use some help with. Or actually, if you could just come over and have a glass of wine with me. Or actually, if you could take Peter for a walk. So now, not only was I getting the help that I needed by asking for it, but I was training myself to ask for it, which made it easier each time. And, also, Peter was getting surrounded by people who loved him and who he loved. So it was a gift for him too.
And what about the word let's?
So let's is a concept that I developed. It just kind of came to me. One day, Peter came home and, the the mechanics of getting gas require you to do a lot of steps that we don't think about, until someone is cognitively impaired. And one of the steps that Peter could no longer do was remember his zip code. So he could put the credit card in, he could pump the gas, but he couldn't remember his zip code. So he could not get gas. And so I decided I would help him. So we drove to the gas station together. And, it could be handled in many ways. I could have just said, stay here, give me the credit card. I'm going to go, I'm going to get the gas, pump it in and do all the fast work of getting gas. Or we can both get out of the car. I can tell him which credit card to use. I can tell him the zip code and numbers to punch in. put the gas, flip the gas thing up, choose the grade. He knows how to put the nozzle in the car, but he's doing it. I'm just there assisting him. So we are doing it together. Let's do this together. And this applies to everything and everyone. Children, it applies to, anyone who has dementia. Let's go get the mail. He would, Peter got to the point where he was bringing me all the neighbors' mail. And so I would have to go back and, redistribute the mail anyway. So let's go get the mail. And then together, which mailbox is it? It's this one. Open up the mailbox. This one, yes. Take out the mail. Okay, I have the mail. Great. Close it up. All right, let's go into the house. And giving them step-by-step instruction made Peter feel very purposeful and useful rather than, no, I'll go get the mail. Don't worry about it. And then, he's left feeling inept. And so I used the concept of let's as long as I could, even all the way down to let's go get dressed, let's go brush your teeth, things like that.
I think what that also does is it helps preserve the dignity that
Yes.
we want our loved ones to still have that sense of dignity and personal empowerment. We see it fade away right in front of our eyes, and we do what we can to stave that off. I also want to ask about one of the the big reason that your story went viral globally was the vow renewal / wedding ceremony. And I understand that your daughter Sarah is a wedding planner, which event planner, which certainly was a huge leap forward in making these things possible because she already had that Rolodex of contacts. And as a wedding officiant myself, I understand how these things can come together and people want to be part of something, whether it's something that's being staged for, a shoot so that everybody can have something to use for marketing purposes, but also because people become friends. And it's like, people in the field and, I like the way that person works. I like the way that person does flowers. I like that music. So all of these people came together and my understanding is volunteered their services. You have this beautiful vow renewal wedding ceremony. I want to ask two specific things about that because I know there's a lot of information about that and people will have the opportunity to read all of the details. But I want you to tell us about the moment that Peter had the idea, and I want you to tell us about the day after.
So the day he asked me, he had forgotten who I was and would talk about his wife to me in such a proud way and talk about how she gardened and how she was building this cabinet. And he was just bragging about her to me, but at the same time, he seemed to be courting me. So it was a little confusing and it was very bittersweet because I wanted to pound my chest and say, I'm right here, right? But also to be in the room where your spouse is talking so beautifully about you is very precious. But we were watching TV one night, and there was a scene where two people were getting married on this comedy. And he looked at me and he said, "Let's do it." And I said, "Do what?" And he pointed to the TV and I said, "Do you want to get married?" And he said, "Yeah, let's do it." And so that's really what happened. And so I recorded it I quickly picked up my phone knowing it was going to be something that I wanted to preserve. And I recorded the whole thing and then I sent it to our children. And of course, Sarah responded. She's like, "We're doing this." And I said, "We're not doing this." And then I realized that, one of my mantras is no regrets. And I knew that if I didn't, we would have regrets. And so that's how he asked me to marry him in his own words that remained in his vocabulary. And so the vow renewal was beautiful. He was lively and more cognitively aware than he had been in months. And he was so happy. It was beautiful. And the day after, he forgot it all. He forgot it all. And I think that's one of the hardest things about this disease is that you build this life with a person and you build these memories with the person and they forget it all. And you are the keeper of all of those memories and secrets and beautiful things that you've built together. And that's the hardest part.
And how long, time-wise, from the vow renewal wedding was it that Peter died?
8 months to the day, exactly 8 months.
I'm going to switch gears here for just a minute to part of the process of writing the book itself, because the show is page one, and a lot of people who watch the show are writers. You made a point in the book of noting often how much, when you were talking about some progression of the disease, you made a point to track the time of how long it had been since the diagnosis, which I found extremely helpful. But what was your reason for being sure to note how much time had passed?
I think a couple of things. One is back to that, I needed a witness. Like, look what's happening to us. Look how fast this is happening. Slow down. Um, and I wanted people to understand how quickly it was happening. And oftentimes we hear, oh, dementia can last 20 years. And it can, but that wasn't our story. Our story was from diagnosis to death, 3 years and 9 months. It was fast. And I wanted to remind myself to be very, very grateful for every moment that we had and every moment that we still have together. And even now, I made it a point to find joy every day. And even through the muck of it all, and hold on to our memories together so that I could keep finding joy. And I just really wanted to be grateful for every moment.
And I so agree with you. I'm so appreciative of that structure that you used in the book. It is it creates benchmarks
Mm.
for all of us to realize whether we're watching someone, we care for going through as a caregiver, but also for those of us as caregivers is to realize, because sometimes I think we get in this. I just likened it to a fog. I couldn't think, I couldn't plan a year ahead, 6 months. I couldn't plan a
Oh
week
my
ahead.
God.
I
Oh,
mean, one day was, oh my gosh, I could think about what's going to happen tomorrow. That was huge. And I
yes.
don't think people realize that. I also wanted to ask about at the end of the chapters of your book, you do what is currently being called in the writing community a hybrid memoir, meaning that you are including like a self-help component. So at the end, you would have what you called Lisa's look back, and that gave that
Mhm.
perspective, like, hindsight being 2020. But you also had questions to ponder. Could you talk about those two things? Oh, and we're getting the 2-minute signal. So this is an important question.
Yeah, I think it's it helps to reflect back on the chapter and the key points in the chapter so that people can prepare for what may be coming up in their life. How would I handle this? How would I handle this? Would I do the same thing that Lisa did? Or is there some other way that suits my life better? I think it was just very important. And just because this was my story doesn't mean that everyone handles things the same way that I do.
Thank you. A huge giant
Yeah.
thank you underlined with exclamation points.
Thank you.
I also want to say to the viewing audience, um, I like to close this show with the words of the late fantasy writer Ursula Le Guin. And she said, there have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories. So
Mm.
find your story, find a way to tell it, maybe through a memoir, and please join me again next time. Thank you.